Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. This is Zeitgeist Movement's Global Radio, November 28th, 2012. My name is Peter Joseph, and this broadcast is going to delve into the Zeitgeist Movement's new orientation, part one of which is now uploaded in PDF and HTML form. You can go to the zeitgeistmovement.com and then click on the education button and then drop down to orientation, and you will see the existing data. This has been a very intense thing to produce. The other three sections, since this is part one of four that has been currently released, will be out fairly soon. They are in draft mode, but this is very tedious and has been a very difficult and arduous thing to put together to make something that's very clear and concise, but yet not too overbearing, not something hundreds and hundreds of pages long that is just too intimidating for most people to get their head around or even have time to read it. The entire guide will eventually be put into video form as well. There are currently, I guess, about 22 essays and forms, which means there'll be 22 different videos, and there'll probably be a holistic video as well. But this will be a lot easier to communicate to others if it's in fragmented form based on subject. So we can maybe get people interested in certain types of subjects over on our side to see how it fits into a larger context, hence the train of thought. And I want to state that word again, as you're going to hear it many times in the things I'm about to read. The train of thought is what's critical, not organization in a sense, not structure in a sense. If you think about the evolution of, say, science, technology, mathematics, there's an internal logic that comes up, where someone isn't having to assess in concert with some other group of people to understand mathematical logic. Once math was created, it spread, its logic was formulated, so to speak, and people had vast discoveries in the realm of mathematics all across the world with no contact with each other, such as two people discovering calculus at the same time who didn't even know each other hundreds of years ago. So the movement, in my view, this is my perspective, and you can agree with it or not, the movement, in my view, needs to take on a life of its own. It's not about any set institution anymore. It's about getting this data flowing, getting an external perspective happening in all chapters where it's all about projects. A lot of internal disputes have been going on out there. I've been very aware of them. They've been there since day one for 5 years. And my criticism is always the same. Have you kept an outward focus? And if you haven't kept an outward focus as the core driver, which some of the most productive people I've seen in the movement have, then there's something probably wrong. But I'll leave it at that. So, the Zeitgeist Movement Orientation Guide is 22 essays, as I mentioned, with a series of appendices. And again, please go and you can follow along to my reading, even though, again, I'm probably going to do a little bit of paraphrasing here. This is going to be put out in total, if I haven't said it already, by December 31st, ideally, maybe a week or two after. And as I mentioned in the last broadcast, I want this type of data. I prefer this type of data, at least at Zeitgeist Day Los Angeles. It's going to be based entirely around this type of data to be the foundation of Zeitgeist Day events coming up in March. It's a new level that we're trying to achieve here, and I think it can be very, very effective if we hone in and begin to think about strategies to get this type of information out there. And again, bridging other organizations that share similar goals. If you want to talk about human freedom and human rights, the ACLU in America, there's a lot of undercurrent subject matter that needs to be taken into account with respect to economics, and they might just come along. If you want to talk about ecological problems and environmental rights, carbon footprint, all of the waste of globalization, everything that's been talked about by Greenpeace and numerous other organizations, the bridge is very clear in some of this writing. This information was put out by a very core lecture team, and that is another thing, in fact. Supplemental lecture team information is going to be posted eventually as well once this is finished. Even though the guide itself will suffice, there needs to be a more concentrated document that shows approach. And the real crutch of the movement, crutch is the wrong word, the real power of the movement is in this new lecture team facility. Again, we could talk about administration and structure all day long, but unless we have people out there on the street, in conferences, in whatever people can come up with to engage and get this stuff out there, not in the name of the Zeitgeist Movement. Zeitgeist Movement is just a representative gesture. And a lot of people don't get that. But nevertheless, this is where we are and how critically important this information has been. And again, I apologize for how long it's taken, but once you get through the data, you'll begin to see that this is not a fly-by-night type of thing. This is a very centralized angle that hopefully will spark deep inspiration and, of course, educate in a very proficient way, which is the ultimate goal. Again, it's time the movement takes on a life of its own. And it should be a powerful place when we can eventually see this movement's ideas, the ideas that are not the movement's, but the movement's advocation and train of thought, which is built upon tons of other institutions as well, obviously, but in such a concentrated strategic angle where it really begins to push through. After all, this is why we're here, right? This is what the nature of an intellectual activist movement really is. And for those out there that consider themselves members of the movement, ask yourself one question: what are you doing to spread this data? I'm a filmmaker, so my talent is applied in a way to take certain styles and combine them with this type of data. My prior film series, my new film series, Inner Reflections, the Culture in Decline satire series, my bad public access show. This is what I know. So it all comes down to where your comfort zone is and what you know as well, and how to get this type of stuff out there. And remember, nobody's stopping you from doing anything. It doesn't take some global approval of the Zeitgeist movement to start your own interests, to start your own projects in your own area. Unless it's so hideously deviated where the name would be poorly associated, you're not going to find much objection. The life of its own, the train of thought moving forward, a self-calculating arrival at conclusions based on this simple premise of understanding causality and building out a new social model from it. Again, once it takes hold, it will multiply and magnify just like mathematics did. And as an aside, I believe I already talked about Zeitgeist Day last radio show and the like, and meetings will be held for that as well. The new global forum is trying to be launched soon. There's a programming problem that we have to get fixed very, very soon, and then that's going to go live. Also, there's interest to make a documentary on the movement itself, not by me, but by other people, to make a documentary about the movement, not just the content, like an introductory orientation, as will be produced with this 22 essay guide that I've just described, but something about what the movement has done. And when the forum goes up, we'll have a post on this to begin talking about how an hour and a half long documentary, submitting what videos all of our chapters have, the photography, conducting global interviews in multiple languages to show how powerful the accomplishments have been over the past 5 years. The problem with many people is they don't see all this amazing stuff that's happened, just incredible global unity. They don't see it because it's not readily available. I mean, you can scour through a social network. We do have some press-related stuff on the website, but it's simply too much to track. So this new idea to make a documentary on the Zeitgeist movement has come forward, and more will be described about that, and it will definitely need to be a community effort, to say the least. We'll get some people that are really into the Zeitgeist Media Project, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, Zeitgeist Media Project. You can link to it from the global site. Lots of films and visual media is uploaded there, as well as music. We can build out with those talents to help create this new documentary. And it could be the official documentary of the movement, if you want to call it something like that. But it's not an orientation, once again. It's about what the movement has accomplished, and it can include its controversy and everything else. So that's just food for thought out there for a future community project. All right, so I'm going to jump right into this because I don't intend to actually be talking too much today. But I do intend to kind of go through essay by essay as time moves forward on these shows, even though you can go and read it, but just to kind of give it an oral quality before we get the videos out there. So people that don't read as much or not time, or they're sitting at work, and actually just listen to this. And if anyone out there cares to syndicate this, to take it, cut it, and reproduce it on YouTube, what have you, maybe even provide imagery to it, all of that would be a lot of fun to do. Again, eventually this will be produced in videos, but I don't have time to do it, and we have to find a core group of people to do that in and of itself to make a really good video series. It's an educational series of 22 videos. All right, we're going to jump right into the preface. Thorstein Veblen made a great quote: "The outcome of any serious research can only be to make two questions grow where only one grew before." The origin of the name the Zeitgeist Movement. The Zeitgeist Movement is the existing identifier for the social movement described here. The name has no relevant historical reference to anything culturally specific and is not to be confused or associated with anything else known before with a similar title. Rather, the title is based upon the semantic meaning of the very terms explicitly. The term zeitgeist is defined as the general intellectual, moral, and cultural climate of an era. The term movement simply implies motion or change. Therefore, the Zeitgeist Movement, or TZM, is an organization which urges change in the dominant intellectual, moral, and cultural climate of the time. As far as the document's structure, the text has been prepared to be as concise yet comprehensive as possible. In form, it is a series of essays ordered by subject in a manner which will work to support a broader context. While each essay is designed to be taken on its own merit in evaluation, the true context resides in how each issue works to support a larger train of thought with respect to the most efficient organization of human society. It will be noticed by those who read these essays in a linear fashion that a fair amount of overlap exists with certain ideas. This is deliberate, as repetition and emphasis is considered helpful given how foreign some of these concepts might seem to those with no prior exposure. Also, only so much detail can be afforded with a guide like this, especially given the gravity of some of the subjects and how they interrelate. So a great deal of third-party sourcing exists via footnotes and appendices. To really read this guide is to make sure you follow the footnotes and appendices. The organism of knowledge. As with any form of presented research, we are dealing with serially generated data composites. Observation, its assessment, documentation, and integration with other knowledge, existing or pending, is the manner by which all distinguishable ideas come to evolve. This continuum is important to understand with respect to the way we think about what we believe and why, for information is always separate in its merit from the person or institution communicating or representing it. Information can only be evaluated correctly through a systematic process of comparison to other physically verifiable evidence as to its proof or lack thereof. Likewise, this continuum also implies that there can be no empirical origin of ideas. From an epistemological perspective, knowledge is mostly culminated, processed, and expanded through communication amongst our species. The individual, with his or her inherently different life experience and propensities, serves as a custom processing filter by which a given idea can be morphed. Collectively, we individuals comprise what could be called a group mind, which is the larger order social processor by which the effort of individuals ideally coalesce. The traditional method of data transfer through, say, literature, sharing books from generation to generation, has been a notable path of this group mind interaction, for example. By the way, in Carl Sagan's work, Cosmos, he makes a very unique statement with respect to the group mind concept worth mentioning here. It has to do with the Library of Alexandria, and for those that know, this was a massive library that housed all the origins of religion. It housed a powerful a culmination of the incredible intellect from the ancient world. And it was quickly destroyed through two different religious circumstances, religious groups that destroyed it, burnt it down, basically. And Carl Sagan, quote, says, "It was as if the entire civilization had undergone some self-inflicted brain surgery, and most of its memories, discoveries, ideas, and passions were extinguished irrevocably." Continuing, Isaac Newton perhaps put this reality best with the statement, "If I have seen further than others, it is by standing upon the shoulders of giants." This is brought up here in order to focus the reader on the critical consideration of data, not a supposed source, as there actually is no such thing in an empirical sense. Only in the temporal traditional patterns of culture, such as with literary credits in a textbook for future research reference, is such a recognition technically relevant. There is no statement more erroneous than the declaration that, quote, "This is my idea." Such notions are byproducts of material culture that has been reinforced in seeking physical rewards, usually via money, in exchange for the illusion of their proprietary creations. Very often an ego association is culminated as well, where an individual claims prestige about their credit for an idea or supposed invention. However, that is not to exclude gratitude and respect for those figures or institutions which have shown dedication and perseverance towards the expansion of knowledge itself, nor to diminish the necessity of importance of those who have achieved a skilled, expert, specialized status in a particular field. The contributions of brilliant researchers, thinkers, and engineers, such as R. Buckminster Fuller, Jacques Fresco, Jeremy Rifkin, Ray Kurzweil, Robert Sapolsky, Thorsten Veblen, Richard Wilkinson, Dr. James Gilligan, Carl Sagan, Nikola Tesla, Stephen Hawking, and many, many more researchers, past and present, are quoted and sourced in this text and serve as part of the larger order data composite you are about to read. Great gratitude is expressed here towards all dedicated minds who are working to contribute to an ever-improving world. Yet, once again, when it comes to the level of understanding, information itself has no origin, no loyalty, no price tag, no ego, and no bias. It simply manifests, self-corrects, and evolves as an organism in and of itself through our collective group mind, to which we are all invariably a component vehicle. That understood, the Zeitgeist Movement claims no origination of any idea it promotes and is best categorized as an activist educational institution which works to amplify a context upon which existing emerging scientific findings may find a concerted social imperative. The following websites are officially related to the Zeitgeist Movement. Our main global hub is thezeitgeistmovement.com. Our main hub for chapter-related interests is tzmchapters.net. Our official blog for member submissions, blog.thezeitgeistmovement.com. Our global forum, thezeitgeistmovementforum.org. The Zeitgeist Media Project for audio-visual and literary media in an artistic context, zeitgeistmediaproject.com. Our news portal, which is extremely brilliant, zeitgeistnews.org, run by some tremendously good people. Our annual event day, intellectual event day called Zeitgeist Day or Z-Day, global hub website, zdayglobal.org. The Zeitgeist Media Festival, our arts festival, which we also conduct annually globally, zeitgeistmediafestival.org. And then there is our Global Redesign Institute initiative, which is just getting off the ground now after these fundamental materials get out there. This is a larger scale project open for participation for those that are interested. It's called the Global Redesign Institute, and the template page that's up now is globalredesigninstitute.org. And there's also a mixed social network site that was put up by a group of people that's actually quite good called tzmnetwork.com. We also have TZM Global on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube, and you can find those links from the global website, thezeitgeistmovement.com. Now, we're going to move to an overview. Part 1, an introduction, overview to the Zeitgeist Movement. I'd like to begin with a quote by Buckminster Fuller. Neither the great political and financial power structures of the world, nor the specialization-blinded professionals, nor the population in general realize that it is now highly feasible to take care of everybody on earth at a higher standard of living than any have ever known. It no longer has to be you or me. Selfishness is unnecessary and henceforth unrationalizable as mandated by survival. War is obsolete. Founded in 2008, the Zeitgeist Movement is a sustainability advocacy group which operates through a network of regional chapters, project teams, public events, media expressions, and charity operations. The Zeitgeist Movement's activism is explicitly based on nonviolent methods of communication, with the core focus on educating the public about the true root sources of many common personal, social, and ecological problems today, coupled with the vast problem-solving and humanity-improving potential science and technology has now enabled, but yet goes unapplied due to barriers inherent in the current established social system. While the term activism is correct by its exact meaning, the Zeitgeist Movement's awareness work should not be misconstrued as relating to culturally common, traditional activist protest actions such as we have seen historically. Rather, the Zeitgeist Movement expresses itself through targeted, rational educational projects that work not to impose, dictate, or blindly persuade, but to set in motion a train of thought that is logically self-realizing when the causal considerations of sustainability and public health are referenced from a scientific perspective. However, the Zeitgeist Movement's pursuit is still very similar to traditional civil rights movements of the past, in that the observations reveal the truly unnecessary oppression inherent in the current social order, which structurally and sociologically restricts human well-being and potential for the vast majority of the world's population, not to mention stifles broad improvement in general due to its established methods. For instance, the current social model, while perpetuating enormous levels of corrosive economic inefficiency in general, as will be described in future essays, also intrinsically supports one economic group or class of people over another, perpetuating technically unnecessary imbalance and relative deprivation. This could be called economic bigotry in its effect, and it is no less insidious than discrimination rooted in gender, ethnicity, religion, or creed. However, this inherent bigotry is really only a part of a larger consideration which could be termed structural violence, illuminating a broad spectrum of built-in suffering, inhumanity, and deprivation that is simply accepted as normality today by an uninformed majority. This context of violence stretches much farther and deeper than many consider. The scope of how our socioeconomic system unnecessarily diminishes our public health and inhibits our progress today can only be recognized clearly when we take a more detached, technical, or scientific perspective of social affairs, bypassing our traditional, often blinding familiarities. The relative nature of our awareness falls victim to assumptions of perceived normality, where, say, the ongoing deprivation and poverty of over 3 billion people might seem natural, an inalterable social state to those who are not aware of the amount of food, for example, actually produced in the world, where it goes, how it is wasted, or the technical nature of efficient and abundant food production possibilities in the modern day. This unseen violence can be extended to cultural memes as well, memes being ideas transferred from person to person, where social traditions and their psychology can, without direct malicious intent, create resulting consequences that are damaging to the human being. For example, there are religious cultures in the world that opt out of any form of common medical treatment. While many might argue the moral or ethical parameters of what it means for a child in such a culture to die of a common illness, one that could have been resolved if modern scientific applications were allowed, we can at least agree that the death of such a child is really being caused not by the disease itself at that point, but by the sociological condition that disallowed the application of the solution. As a broader example, a great deal of social study has now been done on the subject of social inequality or inequity and its effects on public health. As will be discussed more so in future essays, there's a vast array of physical and mental health problems that appear to be born out of this condition, including propensities towards physical violence, heart disease, depression, educational deficiency, and many, many other detriments. Detriments that have a truly social consequence, which eventually affect us all. The bottom line here is that when we step back and consider newly realized understandings of causality that are clearly having detrimental effects on the human condition, but go unabated unnecessarily due to pre-existing traditions established by culture, we inevitably end up in the context of civil rights and hence social sustainability. This new civil rights movement is about the sharing of human knowledge and our technical ability to not only solve problems, but to also facilitate a scientifically derived social system that actually optimizes our potential and well-being. Anything less will create imbalance and social destabilization, as the neglect of such issues are simply a form of oppression, a hidden form of oppression. So, returning to the broad point, the Zeitgeist Movement works not only to create awareness of such problems and their true systemic roots, hence logic for resolution. It also works to express the potential we have beyond such direct problem solving, potential to greatly improve the human condition in general, solving problems which, in fact, have not yet even been realized. This is initiated by embracing the very nature of scientific reasoning, where the establishment of a near-empirical train of thought takes precedence over everything else in importance, a train of thought by which societal organization as a whole can find a more accurate context for sustainability on a scale never before seen through an active recognition and application of the scientific method. Focus. The Zeitgeist Movement's broad actions can be summarized as to diagnose, educate, and create. Diagnosis is the identification of the nature and cause of anything. To properly diagnose the causal condition of the vast social and ecological problems we have today is not to merely complain about them or criticize the actions of people or particular institutions. A true diagnosis must seek out the lowest causal denominator possible and work to source at that level for resolution. The central problem today is that there is often what could be called a truncated frame of reference, where a short-sighted misdiagnosis of a given consequence persists. For instance, the traditional established solution to the reformation of human behavior for so-called criminal acts is often punitive incarceration. Yet this says nothing about the deeper motivation of the criminals, so to speak, and why their psychology led to such acts to begin with. At that level, such a resolution becomes more complex and reliant upon the symbiotic relationship of their physical and cultural culmination over time. This is no different than when a person dies of cancer, as it isn't really the cancer that kills them in a literal sense, as the cancer itself is the product of other forces. As far as the interest to educate, as an educational movement that operates under the assumption that knowledge is the most powerful weapon we have to create lasting, relevant social change in the global community, there is nothing more critical than the quality of one's personal education and their ability to communicate such ideas effectively and constructively to others. The Zeitgeist Movement is not about following a rigid text of static ideas. Such confined, narrow associations are typical of religious and political cults, not the recognition of emergence that underscores the, quote, anti-establishment, unquote, nature of the Zeitgeist Movement. As an aside, anti-establishment in this context is not the typical context where you're against the current ruling establishment. This distinction of being anti-establishment means that we're against the concept of establishment institutions in and of themselves, because if you think about the law of emergence, there really cannot be establishments. And sadly, the property and monetary culture continues to reinforce these stifling establishments all the time. Continuing, the Zeitgeist Movement does not impose in this sense. Rather, it works to make an open-ended train of thought become realized by the individual, hopefully empowering their independent ability to understand its relevance on their own terms at their own pace. Furthermore, education is not only an imperative for those unfamiliar with the train of thought and application set related to the Zeitgeist Movement, but also for those who already subscribe to it. Just as there is no utopia, there is no final state of understanding. As far as creation, while certainly related to the need to adjust human values through education so the world's people understand and see the need for such social changes, the Zeitgeist Movement also works to consider how a new social system based on optimum economic efficiency would appear and operate in detail given our current state of technical ability. Programs such as the Global Redesign Institute, which is a digital think tank that works to express how the core societal infrastructure could unfold based on our current state of technology, working to combine that technical capacity with the scientific train of thought so as to calculate the most efficient technical infrastructure possible for any given region of the world, is one example. It is worth briefly noting that the Zeitgeist Movement's advocated governance approach, which has little semblance to the current manner of governance known today or historically, originates out of a multidisciplinary bridging of various proven methods for maximum optimization, unified through a counterbalancing systems approach that is designed to be as adaptive as possible to new emerging improvements over time. As will be discussed later, the only possible reference that could be considered most complete at a given time is one that takes into account the largest interacting observational system, if you will, tangibly relevant. This is the nature of the cause and effect synergy that underscores the technical basis for a truly sustainable economy, not to mention human values. The natural law resource-based economy. Today, various terms exist to express the general logical basis for a more scientifically oriented social system in different circles, including the titles resource-based economy or natural law economy. While these titles are historically referential and somewhat arbitrary overall, the title natural law resource-based economy, or NLRBE, will be utilized here as the concept descriptor since it has the most concrete and complete semantic basis. As an aside, if you were to tell someone a resource-based economy, especially those in the economic spheres that want to go back to the gold standard, confusion often emerges. However, if you bring in natural law, a natural law economy, a natural law orientation of resources, and then, of course, natural law orientation of human behavior is built in, then it begins to make more sense. Continuing, a natural law resource-based economy is to be defined as, open quote, an adaptive socioeconomic system actively derived from direct physical reference to the governing scientific laws of nature, unquote. Overall, the observation is that through the use of socially targeted research and tested understandings in science and technology, we are now able to logically arrive at societal approaches which could be profoundly more effective in meeting the needs of the human population, not to mention create broad sustainability. We are now able to dramatically increase public health, better preserve the habitat, while also strategically reduce or eliminate many common social problems present today, which are sadly considered inalterable by many due to their cultural persistence. Since the dawn of scientific recognition, this general reasoning is nothing new in gesture, and various notable individuals and organizations, past and present, have alluded to such a scientific reorientation of society on one level or another. Common examples would be Technocracy, Inc., Buckminster Fuller, Thorstein Veblen, Jacques Fresco, H.G. Wells, Carl Sagan, the Singularity Institute and Ray Kurzweil, and many, many others. Train of thought. Likewise, many such figures or groups have also worked to create temporally advanced technological applications, working to apply current possibilities to this train of thought in order to enable new efficiencies and direct problem solving. Examples would be Jacques Fresco's city systems, circular city systems, or Buckminster Fuller's Dymaxion house, and other technologies. Yet, as obviously important as this applied engineering is, it is still critical to remember that all specific technological applications can only be transient when the evolution of scientific knowledge and its emerging technological applications are taken into account. This makes all current applications of technology obsolete over time. As an aside, the term application set runs through these essays. Application set, it would be defined as the temporal innovations, the possibilities currently available, whether utilized or not, to make things more efficient. However, the application set is always arbitrary in the broad scheme. Therefore, what is left can only be a train of thought with respect to the underlying causal scientific principles. The Zeitgeist Movement is hence loyal to this train of thought, not figures, institutions, or temporal technological advancements. Rather than follow a person or design, the Zeitgeist Movement follows this self-generating premise of understanding, and it hence operates in a non-centralized holographic manner with this train of thought as the origin of influence for action. A notable pattern worth mentioning is how the evolution of mankind's understanding of itself and its habitat also continues to expand away from older ideas and perspectives which are no longer supported due to the constant introduction of new schema-altering information. A worthy keyword to note here is superstition, which in many circumstances can be viewed as a category of belief that once appeared to be adequately supported by experience and perception, but can no longer be held as viable due to new conflicting data. For example, while traditional religious thought might seem increasingly implausible to more people today than ever in the West, due to the rapid growth in information and general literacy, the roots of religious thought can be traced to periods where humans could justify the validity and accuracy of such beliefs given the limited understanding they had of their environment in those early times. This pattern is apparent in all areas of understanding, including modern academia. Even so-called scientific conclusions, which, again, with the advent of new information and updated tests, often cannot be held as valid anymore, are still commonly defended due to their mere inclusion in the current cultural tradition. Such established institutions, as they could be called, often wish to maintain permanence due to reasons of ego, power, market income, or general psychological comfort. This problem is, in many ways, at the core of our social paralysis. So it is important to recognize this pattern of transition and realize how critical being vulnerable really is when it comes to belief systems, not to mention coming to terms with the very dangerous phenomenon of established institutions, which are culturally programmed to seek self-preservation rather than evolve and change. From tradition to emergence. The perceptual clash between our cultural traditions and our ever-growing database of emergent knowledge is at the core of what defines the zeitgeist as we know it, and a long-term review of history shows a slow grind out of superstitious cultural traditions and assumptions of reality as they heed to our newly realized benchmark of emergent scientific causality. This is what the Zeitgeist movement represents in its broadest philosophical context, a movement of the cultural zeitgeist itself into new, verifiable, and more optimized understandings and applications. Hence, while we certainly have witnessed vast and accelerating changes in different areas of human awareness and practice, such as with our vast material technology, it appears our social system is still long behind. Political persuasion, market economics, labor for income, perpetual inequality, nation-state divisions, legal assumptions, and many other staples of our current social order continue to be largely accepted as normality given by the current culture, with little more than their persistence through time as evidence of their value and empirical permanence. It is in this context that the Zeitgeist movement finds its most broad imperative, changing the social system. Again, there are many problem-solving technical possibilities for personal and social progress today that go unnoticed or misunderstood. The ending of war, the resolution of poverty, the creation of a material abundance unseen in history to meet human needs, the removal of most crime as we know it, the empowerment of true personal freedom through the removal of pointless, monotonous labor, and the resolution of many environmental threats, including diseases, are a few of the calculated possibilities we have when we take our technical reality into account. However, again, these possibilities are not only largely unrecognized, they are also literally restricted by the current social order, for the implementation of such problem-solving efficiency and prosperity stands in direct opposition to the very mechanics of how our social system is operating at the core level. Therefore, until the social system tradition and its resulting social values are challenged and updated to present-day understandings and awarenesses, until the majority of the human population understands the basic underlying train of thought technically needed to support human sustainability and good public health, as derived from the rigor of objective scientific investigation and validation, until much of the baggage of prior false assumptions, superstition, divisive loyalties, and other socially unsustainable, conflict-generating cultural hindrances are overcome, all the life-improving and problem-solving possibilities we now have at hand will remain largely dormant. The real revolution is the revolution of values. Human society appears centuries behind in the way it operates and hence what it values. If we wish to progress and solve the mounting problems at hand, and in effect reverse what is an accelerating decline of our civilization in many ways, we need to change the way we think about ourselves and hence the world we inhabit. The Zeitgeist movement's central task is to work to bring this value shift to light, unifying the human family with the basic perspective that we all share this small planet and we are all bound by the same natural order laws as realized by the method of science. This common ground understanding extends much farther than many have understood in the past. The symbiosis of the human species and the synergistic relationship of our place in the physical world confirms that we are not separate entities in any respect, and that the new societal awakening must show a working social model that is arrived at from this inherent logic if we expect to survive and prosper in the long term. We can align or we can suffer. It is up to us. And this concludes the overview essay from the 2012 The Zeitgeist Movement Defined, Realizing a New Train of Thought orientation text. The first part of which has been released, 33 pages, and the latter 3 parts will be arriving soon. Now, originally in this broadcast, I was going to read the Scientific Worldview, technically the second official essay, but in many ways the third essay. But I'm not going to due to time reasons. I only wanted to allocate an hour for this. We are approaching that, so I'm going to end a little bit early. But this will be for another broadcast, if not next week, a week prior, depending on who's up. So thank you all for listening. Please go and review this existing 33-page document. PDF download can be brought from the site, or you can actually review it on the site as well. It's a little bit easier to read in PDF because of the footnotes. You really can't see the footnotes when you look at it on the webpage. But I hope everyone's doing well out there, and a lot of big stuff happening on the horizon in general. And I want to thank everybody out there for their dedication and patience and discipline with everything that's been going on. And, I'll talk to you guys very soon. Take care.